Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Saturdays for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. Not actually professor, not actually PhD, don't actually work at a university. Okay, got the disclaimers out of the way. We are here to bring you another midweek episode. I knew as soon as I said I wanted to do episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that things would come up and I would end up having to do like one episode on a Wednesday. And of course, as soon as I say, I try to plan on having episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now I'm doing one episode midweek on Wednesdays. And that's not going to be the permanent schedule shift. That's just how things worked out this week. And so this week, we're going to be going over St. Augustine and his book. I have it over here. St. Augustine's City of God. Now, this is going to be a very brief, very surface level look at City of God. Obviously, it's a very complex book. St. Augustine's a great thinker, very deep thinker. This is not something I can adequately explain in 10 minutes, but I think it's something good for us to, we can kind of just take a look at it, see what's going, because it was in response to something that happened at the time. St. Augustine writes this in response to the 410 sack of Rome. But first, we want to do a little background. So who was St. Augustine? So he's born in 354 BC, AD, excuse me, 354 AD, and he dies in 430 AD. He was both he's both the church father and a doctor of the church. From the reading I was doing, it seems like St. Augustine was a Latinized Berber. So Berbers are they're like people who are native to North Africa. Still Berbers in North Africa today. But when the Romans took over North Africa, you have people who are more of Roman heritage and more of the native Berber heritage. And it seems that St. Augustine came more from that Berber ethnicity. He had a Christian mother whose name was Monica. She's Saint Monica. She is a saint in no small part due to her continuous praying that her son convert to Catholicism, which eventually did happen. She had to push him on it a great deal. Talk a little bit more about that later. And he also had a pagan father. So that may explain a little bit of why he did not necessarily become, or why he didn't adhere to Catholic Christianity right off the bat in his life. As we'll see, he was a little bit of a playboy, kind of going around with some guys who maybe you shouldn't be going around with, running around with some loose women, shall we say. But so Augustine studies rhetoric. He's clearly very intelligent. He first studies rhetoric in his kind of native region there, which was called Tagaste in North Africa, which is like kind of west of Carthage. And then after a while, he kind of outgrows the schools there, and then he moves on to Carthage, and then he kind of outgrows the schools there, and then he moves on to Rome, and he studies and teaches rhetoric there, and then eventually he'll be studying and teaching rhetoric in Milan, which is kind of like, that's like the pinnacle of his academic career. He was very well versed in Latin, not quite so well versed in Greek. Now, that's not to say that he didn't know Greek or couldn't speak Greek. Obviously, he had some competence in Greek, but his competency in Latin was excellent. His competency in Greek was just not quite so good. But it's a high bar for you to set for that. And as I said, he did have a bit of a dark streak in him when he was younger. One of the famous stories from his Confessions, so apart from the City of God, his other best known work is called the Confessions, which is kind of his autobiography. And in that, he talks about, for example, there's a story where when he's young, him and a group of guys who he was friends with went to, I can't remember if it was like a fruit tree in a park, or if it was like some neighbor's fruit tree. But they go and they steal the fruit from the tree, but they're not hungry. They don't want to eat it. They literally go into the yard, they steal the fruit, they run away, and then they throw it away. And he's later on, he's reflecting about this, and he was like, why did we do that? We didn't even eat the fruit. What was the point of stealing it? And he basically comes to the conclusion that we did it because it was against the rules, which is very interesting. You kind of have to say there, kids do kind of have this tendency to, it's like, oh, well, mom and dad told me I can't do something, or my teacher told me I can't do something. Well, I have to do it because it's against the rules, and I got to break the rules and be edgy, right? But that's just an example. He also, Augustine had a relationship with a woman who he was not married to. He was with her for quite a while. I think I remember reading it was about 10 years that he was with her, and he had a child with her. He had a son who apparently was also very intelligent, which is not wildly surprising considering that his father was a father and a doctor of the church. But he never married the woman, and he broke off the relationship with her. Actually, not when he went to become a priest. He actually broke off the relationship he had with her because he was going to be marrying. He was engaged in a sort of arranged marriage to marry somebody else. But that girl was 10 years old at the time, and so he had to wait 2 years for her to turn 12 because the legal age, the youngest age you could get married in Rome at the time was 12 years old. So there was a 2-year gap between when he was essentially engaged to her and when he could marry her. And in that 2-year gap was when Augustine decided to become a priest. So with that bit of biographical information out of the way, we turn again to City of God. This is the really old, I bought this used in college, and I still have it on my bookshelf. This is it's City of God, translated by Gerald G. Walsh, S.J., Demetrius B. Zima, S.J., Grace Monahan, OSU, and Daniel Honan. Great Christian classics. Abridged for modern readers with a foreword by Vernon J. Bork. Very good. So what was City of God about? Well, St. Augustine writes his book City of God in response to the 410 sack of Rome by the Visigoths, which we covered in an earlier episode. If you go back, we talked about that in Barbarian Invasion, the Visigoths episode. But he actually initially finds out about it because he encounters some refugees from the sack of Rome. It was a couple of nuns who were apparently raped during the sack of Rome, which I know we did mention. That it was I hate to use this term that's gone around in the last year, but mostly peaceful sack of Rome, where, as we talked about, for the most part, it was just stuff stolen and not as much people harmed. But obviously, even if you have a group of 10,000 people, you're going to have 1,000 sickos in the bunch, and certainly that was probably the case when the Visigoths were sacking Rome. A majority of the people are listening. Alaric basically says, "Go steal the stuff, leave the people alone." So that's part of it. And obviously Augustine's trying to console these women who have been molested, and he's trying to tell them, it's not your fault that this happened. It's obviously the fault of the person who carried out this crime. But in the wake of the 410 sack of Rome, and also in the wake of kind of the inevitable collapse of the Western Roman Empire, I think people at the time are at the very least looking at the sack of Rome saying this is really terrible, and probably there are a decent amount of other people who are saying, where are things going here? Things are not looking good. Things are really on a downward trend for the Western Empire. And one thing that starts coming up, and this is even something that has continued on throughout the centuries, even till today, is the argument that Rome starts to decay because of its conversion to Christianity. And that, there were still pagans around back in 410 who were saying, well, were we still pagan, the gods would have still protected us, and this would not have happened. Now, just on looking back, now this is not, obviously Augustine didn't say this because he doesn't have over 1,000 years of history to look back on this with. That argument doesn't hold water because you look at the Eastern Empire, which was also Christian, survived for an additional essentially 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which was still a Roman. So the Eastern Roman Empire is still a Roman Empire. It's Christian. It lasts. It continues. Actually, goes on to flourish later on under Justinian and various other emperors who we'll talk about soon here. I know the fall of Rome. We've been spending a good amount of time on it, but we'll be looking to wrap it up here in the next probably 2 weeks. I would say we have the Huns and the Ostrogoths to do. That should conclude it. But so, what is Augustine's response to the idea that, well, Rome was sacked because they're no longer in favor with the pagan gods? Christianity is the reason that Rome was sacked, and had they not become Christian, this would not have happened. Well, one thing that Augustine points out is that the same people who are making this argument were pagans who survived the sack of Rome because they took sanctuary in Catholic churches, right? The idea of sanctuary, I might have brought this up before, but if you think back to Quasimodo in the Hunchback of Notre Dame movie, when he takes I can't remember the name of the gypsy girl, but he swoops down and saves her, and he carries her back up into the church, and he lifts her up and goes, sanctuary, sanctuary, right? But this was the idea that, even in wartime, if you ran into a church to hide, the enemy would not go in there and harm you. So Augustine, first, one of the things he points out is that, well, you say that the pagan gods would have protected you, but what god was it who protected you when your city was being stormed by barbarians and everything was in total chaos? It wasn't the pagan gods, it was the house of the Christian God which protected you from the chaos. So that's one thing. What else do we have here? Another instance that, or another argument that Augustine makes in this question of is Christianity to blame for the sack of Rome in 410 is that, well, the pagan gods did not, and I'll backtrack on this for a second. It's interesting. He goes back to the Aeneid. So if you've never read the Aeneid, what it is, it picks up with this guy named Aeneas, who was he was a Trojan. And so the Aeneid picks up right where from the Iliad, where the Greeks have gotten into Troy through the Trojan horse. The Greeks are going through the city. They're sacking the city. And Aeneas is a Trojan, and he escapes with his band of Trojans, essentially, gets on some boats and goes on this big adventure. And eventually Aeneas goes and he founds Rome. He goes and he goes to Carthage and meets Dido, who he falls in love with, and then leaves her. And you really feel bad for Dido. She ends up killing herself, throws herself off the tower. But it's a very dramatic, very super long. I remember I was on a train ride home once, listening to the Aeneid, and it was the scene of Dido's suicide, and I thought, just do it already. I've been listening. I'm like, what has this been 25 pages, leading up to your suicide? Just jump, lady. Come on. Not to make light of suicide. It's a joke. Okay. But so Augustine points out that Aeneas is on the losing side of the Trojan War, and that right in the Trojan War, the Greek gods, some of them take the side of the Greeks, and some of them take the side of the Trojans. And the Trojans are the losers in the fight, right? The Trojans lose the Trojan War. And so the Greek gods, who are all on Aeneas' side and who he still continues to worship and have a relationship with throughout the Aeneid, those gods are failures. And that it's only because of the success of Aeneas that those gods still have a chance to be, relevant in the pantheon of Greek and Roman mythology. And so he's pointing out that, the Roman gods were especially the ones who supported Aeneas, were actually relevant because of the actions of a human, you know, the gods did not make Aeneas relevant. Aeneas made the gods relevant. Because if Aeneas had failed, then those gods would have been, it would have been even worse for them because they had just been on the losing side of the Trojan War, and now the hero who they're putting all their eggs in the basket, and now he's hypothetically he would have failed too. Another thing that Augustine points out is that there were disasters in Roman history before, when they were pagan, right? The Gallic barbarians, they sacked Rome in the 400s BC, and I mean, a foreign enemy did not get into the city of Rome for centuries after that, but it did happen while Rome was pagan. There was also during the Punic Wars, the number of Roman military disasters against Hannibal, Cannae, for example, where the Carthaginians essentially surround the Romans and kill something like 90,000 Roman soldiers in the matter of 8 hours or something. I mean, complete disaster. They were still under the protection of the pagan gods at that time. The Battle of Carrhae against the Parthians, right? Cassius takes this big impressive army out to go fight the Parthians and to win himself honor and glory, and they end up getting shot to pieces and run roughshod through the desert by the Parthians. At that time, Rome was under the protection of the pagan gods, and they did. That was another disaster. Julius Caesar, right? Julius Caesar was a dictator, and he comes in and he upends the Roman Republic. Now, maybe some of us, you might have the opinion that Rome was better off with Caesar as a dictator than previously as a republic, but it certainly created a good deal of instability and civil war. And I mean, there was plenty of civil war before that. Rome was not protected in that instance. And as well, the crisis of the 3rd century. Rome had not converted to Christianity during the crisis of the 3rd century, which I mean, very easily could have seen the empire break apart at that point. But fortunately it didn't, partly due to the fact that external threats were not as serious as they were later on in the 5th century. But Rome was pagan at that point as well. And the pagan gods did not protect Rome from those disasters and those dangerous situations. So one last point I'll make is Augustine says that evil happens to someone. It isn't always their fault, right? Like when he's talking about the nuns who he's met who have come as refugees from Rome after the sack and they've been raped, right? It's a terrible thing that's happened. It's not the nuns' fault that they've happened. Sometimes there's acts of evil just occur. We live in a fallen world, obviously. People have free will. Sometimes people choose to do good, and sometimes people choose to do bad. And obviously the fault lies on the one who commits evil. It's not right. When all these bad things happen to Rome, it's not Rome's fault for not honoring the gods sufficiently or not making sufficient sacrifices or whatever. It's like, no, you fought a battle against the Parthians, for example, Carrhae, and you went into their backyard. Fighting in the desert is very hard if you're not a desert culture. Your leader was not particularly competent, and you got to give a lot of credit to the Parthians. They really were on their game for that battle. They fought a really good fight. Fighting in their own backyard, really used that to their advantage, as well as kind of fighting against a bit less of a competent general than Pompey and Caesar, certainly. Now, as I say, that is a very surface level look at St. Augustine, the City of God. I would definitely recommend everyone who's watching this, if you've never read it before. It's fairly digestible. It is kind of long. I mean, you can see that it's this thick, and and the text in this is a bit on the small side. So I'm thinking if you got like a full size, like I'm sure, I have to imagine Penguin Classics makes like a larger version of this. So it will take you a while to get through, but it's certainly a good read. It's one of the classics of the Western canon. St. Augustine, obviously, as I said, he's a doctor of the church. He's a church father. He's one of the great minds in the Western intellectual tradition. So give it a read. Definitely would recommend it. As I said, what we did today was very surface level and most relevant to what we've been talking about in this podcast series. So if you've gotten to this point in the video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and then hit the notification bell so that you never miss another episode. I'm going to grab my phone here for a second because I want to give a shout out to a channel. I want to make sure I get the channel right. I'm pretty sure it's actually very simple, but I want to make sure that I get it absolutely correct. Yes. So if you're watching this as well, please do go check out Eastern Roman History on YouTube. He does a lot of really good stuff in terms of Eastern Roman history and Byzantine history. If you're watching this and you like what I do, you definitely like what he does. He's agreed to give me a shout out, which is great, which will help us grow the channel. And I agreed in response to give him a shout out as well. I mean, I think, I mean, sir, I was referred to Eastern Roman history by one of my subscribers, the excellent Emperor Atlantis. Yeah. Sorry, I see the comments all the time. Thank you, really appreciate it. Just want to make sure I got your name exactly right there, the username. So thanks to him for directing me to Eastern Roman history, and thank you to Eastern Roman history for giving us some shout outs. I really appreciate it. So definitely, if you're watching this video, go check out his stuff as well. It's really good. Some very interesting things, some more like micro level stuff than what I'm doing. What we're doing here is pretty macro. And probably in the future, you know, we'll get into some micro stuff as well. But for the most part, we're doing this like macro history. Really like a 50,000 foot view. He's taking some of his videos are 50,000 foot view, but some of them are much smaller in scope, which is cool. We have an Instagram account. Go follow us on Instagram at academics_95. That's ACADEMIX_95. You can. I found out what was going on with Spotify. It's that since I've been doing this with Zoom, I've been uploading the files as M4As instead of MP3s. And M4A is apparently not compatible with Spotify. So when I upload this, I'll make sure that Zoom gives you both. And I was clicking M4A, and I'll start doing the MP3. So it should be back up on Spotify really quick. So if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Play, please give us a follow. And especially if you're listening on Apple Podcast, please give us a 5-star review. And then you can also find us on Twitter at Professor Renton. So that's it for this video, and I will see you all next time.